Hello, my name is Keisha Bradford. I'm with Doctors for America and a member of the Reproductive Health Coalition. Um, Greatly appreciate you joining. And for today's presentation, we will have, just a heads up, all the presentation materials available afterwards, and we will have the recording included in that. So just a few ground rules. So there's no such thing as a stupid question or a silly question. And please, for questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. We'll be sure to address your questions toward the end of our time today. Before we begin, I just want to let everyone know that our presentation is set to go for 75 minutes. Yes, that's right, 75 minutes, because we have a lot to cover. But we promise that tonight's session will be engaging and also interactive. So I hope you're ready for some fun. If you haven't done so, please feel free to respond to the first poll question. That question being, what state are you located in? We love to get an idea of who all is joining us and where from. So before we jump in, just wanting to provide an overview of the coalition. What is the Reproductive Health Coalition? Well, it's a wide range of professional organizations and even associations that advocate for a unified voice to protect access to reproductive care. And so, love to have you join us. But for tonight, a brief overview of where we'll be going. So, tonight's presentation will consist of what is an op-ed, wanting to ensure that everyone is aware of what that is, because we have individuals perhaps at different levels. We'll be addressing imposter syndrome. That's real. We'll cover the components of what makes a good op-ed. Before going into considerations, we'll explore an op-ed, so looking at an example, and then we will practice. That's right, we will help you begin drafting an op-ed tonight. Then we'll have some reflections, and then we'll pivot into questions. So, buckle up. Now, on to tonight's speakers. Well, I'm thrilled to welcome first Dr. Eileen Barrett. Eileen is a rural intern medicine hospitalist and a faculty with the Institute of Healthcare for Healthcare Improvement. She has held multiple leadership and committee positions in the American Medical Women's Association, the Society of Hospital Medicine, and the American College of Physicians. Her work on physician well-being has been published in many known journals. Next up, we have Dorothea Calvano-Lindquist. Dorothea spent the first decade of her career defending doctors, healthcare workers, hospitals, and healthcare systems in court against medical malpractice claims in Rhode Island. She built a robust foundation of hospital and healthcare leadership. After serving as the chief of staff to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, where she led government relations, communication, and public affairs, Dorothea has returned to the practice of law in her home state, where she continues to focus on systemic change that uplifts the vulnerable. And certainly last but not least, we have Juliana Morris. Juliana is a family doctor and organizer based at the Massachusetts General Hospital, Chelsea Health Center. She is currently completing a Durant Fellowship in Refugee Medicine at the U.S.-Mexico border in Massachusetts, focusing on care delivery and housing access. She has published dozens of op-eds related to her organizing work for immigrant justice, housing, and racial justice. So before we get to the next slide and before we dive into our presentation, again, if you haven't done so already, please be sure to answer the first poll question indicating and identifying what state you're located from. And then we will close that out because we'll move on to our next polling question. Our next polling question will consist of, and like to know, what your experience is with writing an op-ed. All right. So, what is an op-ed? And for this, I will turn it to Dorothea.
Thank you so much, Keisha. Hi, everybody. Good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for that lovely introduction and for setting us up so beautifully. And I am actually not someone who can see the answers to the poll questions. So Keisha, if you are getting those answers, let me know in terms of where are we falling in beginner, intermediate, and expert level. I'm going to go ahead and assume that most of you on this call are more towards the beginner end of the spectrum. I hope that's true because I think it'd be awesome to have 43 new op-ed writers kind of like go out into the world at the end of this evening. And that's what we're hoping to do, is to really increase the number of expert voices out there who are bringing your issues, your opinions, and your expert voices into the world with respect to reproductive health, which is really what we're all here together talking about tonight. What is an op-ed? For those of you who are not expert at doing this, it's an opinion piece, right? It's an opinion piece. This is what the Washington Post says it is, by a guest writer, that would be you, that makes an argument about a topic, and it is traditionally something that's sort of top of mind in the news cycle. You get published if you have just the right opinion or response or voice to answer a hot issue that is in the news cycle. I actually helped create this slide, and I maybe shouldn't have, because I think one of the challenges is that when we as consumers of the news media think about op-eds, we think about the Washington Post and the New York Times, or at least I do. Those are the op-eds that I frequently read. But that is just the very, very tip of the op-ed publishing iceberg. There are an infinite number of sources and places where you might have a really powerful op-ed published that can give you a huge push. It can move the needle, it can change hearts and minds, and it can bring your really expert voice to places that otherwise wouldn't be getting it. So even though I'm the one who stuck the Washington Post idea of what an op-ed is right in this third slide, I want you to keep an open mind in terms of where your voice might best be served as we kind of go through our discussion here tonight. And we can go on to the next slide. And this is going to be mine to talk about as well. Like Keisha mentioned, I was the chief of staff at ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and I talked a lot to a lot of doctors about encouraging them to get out there and use their voices and share their stories. And almost every time I'd really get, even in rooms full of like the most celebrated, highly respected physicians in the country, I'd get, crickets in the audience, because people would say to me and to each other in the audience, am I really the best person to do that? Isn't there someone who knows more? Like, I was taught this by someone else. It's not mine to teach the world. And that is just so prevalent in every room I've ever spoken in. And I want to just call it out and identify it for what it is, and just remind you that you know 10,000 times more than just about everybody else out there in the public who are consuming the news media. And your lived experience is more expert than, just about anything else that's being published out there. So I want to just remind you of this visual. This imposter syndrome is like you thinking that you only know this little tiny bit and everybody else knows more than you. It's really quite the opposite is true. So as you're thinking about, gosh, I don't have anything, new or interesting to say, or I was taught this by somebody else, so isn't there somebody else who's more qualified to write this piece? The answer is really no. You are the expert. You are the most qualified. And especially if you are thinking about writing an op-ed for a more local publication, boy, does that carry a lot of weight to have someone from your hometown who is a doctor, who is a healthcare professional, writing in to express an opinion or a belief or to share information and facts about an argument, it's really powerful stuff. So I'm just here to remind you that everybody has imposter syndrome, and you have to put that aside and remind yourself that you're really the expert that we know you are. And I think we can go on to the next slide unless there's something I forgot.
Nope. So what makes a good op-ed?
Well, I'm sure that my co-presenters will also have a lot to say about this. But a lot of the things on this slide make for a good op-ed, especially if you are in the seat of the editor whose job it is to decide which ones to be published. So, obviously knowing your topic is important. And you are the experts. You're here to tell a story about what you have lived, what you have experienced, what you have been taught, and what you know to be true. So that won't be an issue. You are going to take an opinion, take a side. You are not going to imagine all of the rebuttals that might come in response to your op-ed and kind of flip-flop in your piece. You're going to, really stay true to the point of view that you are expressing. You're going to support your opinion with evidence, with facts, with research. And by the way, we'll have a summary sheet that has a lot of great resources, that has a lot of evidence, so that you'll have that right at your fingertips should you need it. And you're going to speak in your own voice, write really clearly and really concisely. Some of the traps that people fall into when they're writing is that they kind of use a little bit more elevated language than they would normally use to speak or even to write in, because you're worried about sounding smart enough or looking fancy enough when you're published. You really want to be aware of that and just speak simply and in a straightforward, direct, clear way. And I will pause for a minute and let others join into the discussion on this.
Yeah, I think I want to just underline that point you made, Dorothea, about being experts, because even if you're not an expert in the entire field, like I think you're emphasizing that you really are more experts than you think. And even if you're not a big expert in whatever issue you want to talk about, you are an expert of your own experiences. So I think it's really important to think about, what is my specific voice that I can bring to this op-ed? What are the specific stories I can tell from my own experiences, from my own work, or from my own research, whatever it may be, and how to bring those into the op-ed itself, rather than worrying about wanting to be the authority on the entire big topic.
Thank you for that. Exactly.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And if I may add to that as well, and again, amplifying that your expertise is really important, also getting over the imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon. I also really loved hearing the point about thinking that it doesn't have to be in the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Financial Times or the Lancet or something, that you can have really positive impact in your own community, where they love to hear from physicians. And I say this as someone who's had maybe 15 letters and op-eds that have been published. And it's interesting because one of my letters was published in the New York Times, and I am quite sure there's nobody who doesn't know me personally who read it. And it was so much fun to do it with my colleague. But I think the ones that have really, the letters that have led to sort of the idea of an evolution instead of revolution, right? Like this aggregation of marginal gains, this like little change up front, but you kind of build upon it. They were actually the ones that were in my local paper. And it was between my neighbors reaching out, and one time a journalist, twice journalists have reached out. Someone on a public radio station reached out to interview me, because they were really then cared about the issues, and they wanted to hear from healthcare workers, because also healthcare professionals are very deeply respected. Thanks.
Great. So, Juliana, when it comes to why should we write an op-ed? Could you tell us a little bit more about why.
Yeah, definitely. So we've been touching on this, and some of it might seem just obvious, but we want to influence things. We want to change things that we care about. So we can be trying to influence public understanding of a particular issue. We can be trying to influence policymakers. Sometimes you're actually trying to influence the newspaper. Maybe your op-ed doesn't get published, but by the editor seeing multiple op-eds coming through from on a particular topic, maybe they will be more likely to publish on that topic. Or you're also developing a relationship with that editor potentially for the future. And then it can also be used to augment an ongoing campaign. So I think Eileen was talking about how, like, what are the op-eds that get read by people that you know versus not. You are certainly trying to place them in places where people are going to read them because they read that particular publication. And once it's in print, you can go to town. You can put it on social media. There can be actually like a whole campaign around getting the op-ed's message out there. And that can be very helpful for the campaign as well. So I've had situations where we were just struggling. We like could not get hardly anywhere to publish it. But then we went to like some of these more like medical blogs like Kevin MD, Stat. And then once that was in print, then we were able to really send it around, put it on all these listservs, and it was gave it a little bit more credibility than just sharing the piece of writing without that publication.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think I was going to talk about this piece as well.
Yes.
So I wanted to just take a step back and invite you all to reflect for a moment on what's bringing you here tonight. I think some people were already putting in the chat the op-eds that they're planning on writing, but maybe you have a more general interest in the topic. What brought you here today? And we're not going to actually have time to hear from everybody, but just, or hear from anybody, but take a moment to self-reflect. And I found it helpful to ask this question, what's been getting under your skin? Like, what's keeping you up at night? Because those are often the topics that we are able to write most effectively about. You can just crank out that op-ed without having to do a ton of extra research or thinking, because those thoughts are so forefront in your mind. And those are usually the best ones, honestly. So what's been getting under your skin? And I can share a couple things. It can be sort of coming from different directions. So I've written several op-eds related to my work at the US-Mexico border. And in particular, when certain policy changes have come through. So when there have been policy changes that really threaten the health of the folks that I know from helping with their medical needs at the border. And I'm just like up at night thinking about them, what's going to happen. I've written op-eds then about those policy changes, speaking from my experience as a healthcare provider. There have been some other situations where I've been reached out to, like one time Physicians for Human Rights reached out and said like, hey, we have this ongoing campaign around physician misinformation about COVID-19. Is that something that interests you? Would you be interested in writing an op-ed to help augment our campaign? So it's sort of a different avenue, but I got to reflect and think, well, yeah, that is something that's been getting under my skin, and was able to work on that one. So, oh, and I see and obviously, yeah, we're here with the Reproductive Access Coalition, and there's going to be a lot of synchrony about wanting to write about topics around that. And I see other ones coming through too. Thank you for sharing. We can go to the next slide.
Perfect.
So A few things to consider. Who is your audience? We touched on this a little bit, but who are you trying to influence? Because it actually sometimes it seems obvious, but when you really drill down and think like who am I trying to influence? Who are the people that can make this change? And really knowing like, are you trying to influence the policymakers that are going to be able to make the change you want to see? Or are you really trying to influence public opinion to then push and influence the people that are going to be able to make the policy changes? And once you clarify that, it can make it a lot easier to write the op-ed because you're not trying to do too much in 800 words. What's unique about my perspective, we talked about that already, is the goal to be published. We talked about this a little bit. So are you mostly just wanting to get your thoughts on paper and send it to the editor, potentially influence the editor? Or do you really want this to get into print? And usually the answer is going to be yes. And in which case, it's important to think realistically about what publication would be feasible for you. And sometimes it's good to have sort of like college applications, like a reach publication and some backup publications. But you want to be thoughtful about that too, because usually you need to wait until you hear back from the editor before you go submit somewhere else, and it can take some time. So depending on the timeliness, you might want to go more for your local paper or for a more realistic publication first. And the op-ed project has this big list of different potential publications you can consider. That's really helpful. Will be in the resources.
Mm-hmm.
What are you trying to do with your op-ed? Are you responding to a particular idea that's out there in the news and are needing to provide a counterpoint? Are you trying to get people to take action on a particular issue and in a particular way? Like, are you trying to get people to call into their senators about X issue? Is it more general education? Connects with the issue of the audience in some ways, but slightly different. And what do you want to come from the writing? And these are just some questions to help guide you. I think we've kind of covered this general topic. And also, is there an opportunity to coordinate and collaborate? And I mentioned some of the times that I was able to use an op-ed to augment an ongoing campaign. I've also worked on for some of our local campaigns when many of my friends and neighbors were working on the campaign for driver's license for all folks, including undocumented immigrants here in Massachusetts. And I was able to write an op-ed about the health impacts of that issue. And that was able to be helpful as well in sort of a different way. And I was able to share that then with the group so they could share that as well if that was helpful for them in their ongoing advocacy. I also like to think about, people will listen to doctors and maybe they'll listen to doctors more than patients or other folks that are already talking about these issues and putting their voices out there. And it can be helpful to think about ways that you can use your op-ed to quote or cite or just call the spotlight to some voices that are maybe more marginalized that would be helpful to lift up in your op-ed as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Juliana. Eileen, what are other important considerations worth noting?
So two that are highlighted here that I hope that people do keep in mind, in addition to the amazing points that we just heard that help us sort of hone our message and think about just what is the outcome that we want and how do we collaborate and get good work across the finish line, is to always remember, of course, that physicians are self-regulating, and that is because we take this oath, right? And that we also the idea of medical ethics is that we can be self-regulating, and that because we and our record of doing so reinforces that. So that is why physicians are overseen by medical boards. So I'll ask us to always remember that we do always have a duty to the medical to the profession and also to the patients, and that has to do with also being accurate, as accurate as the science shows, right? And also being professional, because of course your boss might read whatever you write, but also so might your kids. Also, so might the medical board. Where I live, there happened to be a physician who was sort of sounding off about some pretty medically inaccurate things, and was actually reported to the medical board because it was published in the newspaper. So I know that nobody here would do that, but I just want everybody to remember that we don't know who's going to read the work that we do, and to remember, of course, that why we're here is for the patients and for our peers and for the profession, and of course for the work to always reflect that, because we would only want our good efforts and our best efforts to come back to look the best for us and anybody else who will take a look.
Thank you. All right, so let's get started.
Okay. Let's get started. So Juliana asked you all to think about, what are you doing here tonight? What is getting under your skin? And I know you all started on that mental journey a few minutes ago, and we've been sort of floating the concept of, what you're an expert in, what your personal experience has been, what is your voice, what is your unique contribution to this conversation, whatever the topic is. And we're actually going to do it in a few more slides. So everybody get out a pen or a blank page on your device that you're looking at, because we're going to actually put sentences down that start to build a framework of this thing that you will make beautiful and lovely, and then pass it off to your friend to read it for you and give it back to you. And you're going to take that feedback and and work on it. And so the thing one thing I want to talk about just at this moment is, and so you're going to let this marinate for a few more slides before you actually have to write something down. But, Juliana reminded me that this is the most important thing because it's the first thing and it's the lead, and it's the headline basically of your op-ed. It's your thesis, it's your opinion. What is it that you are here to say, to talk about? And you want to, you start with that. It's the thing that comes first, and you have to get to it really quickly. So if you could sum up the entire answer to the question, what's getting under my skin, you'd say it in that one sentence, and that would be your lead. And then you're going to follow that with a couple of examples, probably no more than 3, really clearly and concisely. And then you're going to state really what you think should happen or shouldn't happen, depending on what your issue is. You're going to give a solution to the problem that you've identified, which is also sort of your conclusion for the piece. It's that quick. And so I'm going to give you an example of something just to jog your thoughts a little bit about something that is very exactly the answer to the question, what's getting under your skin? And I'm going to say it to you right now. So for example, one thing that has been sitting right under the surface of my skin for the last several days is seeing Vice President Harris standing up on these spectacular stages, giving talks, pertaining to the anniversary of the Roe decision, with this giant sign behind her and behind all the participants that says "Restore Roe." That phrase has been sitting right underneath the surface of my skin, "Restore Roe," in giant block letters in every Democratic address that I've seen over the past week or so. And so here's what my lead would be. And I've included it in one of the slides that you're going to see in a couple seconds. Restoring Roe is the wrong approach to securing abortion access for all who need it. That's my lead. That's what's getting under my skin. It's that phrase, restoring Roe. And then I'm going to follow that with a couple of reasons why I think that, why that is true. And then I'm going to tell you why we shouldn't be restoring Roe. We should be doing much, much better than what Roe gave us, which was a compromise 50 years ago. And we need to move forward and not backward, blah, blah, blah. Dress it up a little bit, keep it to 600 to 800 words. And then I'm going to hand it over to my friends, Juliana and Eileen, who would read it for me and give me some feedback, which I would then listen to, because I really want to make sure that the people who are reading it understand it as clearly as it was intended to be understood. And I'll open up to my co-presenters to see if there's anything else that they'd like to add.
Yeah, I'd love to add just a couple quick things. Thank you so much for that overview. Another thing to think about as part of the lead is how are you going to hook your reader? So if it's a issue that's like very prominent in the news cycle that just everybody's talking about, you can probably start just with that line that Dorothea mentioned, and that's the start to the op-ed. But if you have an issue that maybe isn't quite on the forefront of everyone's mind, you might need to think about how are you going to get people to even look at your op-ed in the first place or care about this issue, and also the editors. So if you're talking about an issue that is a little bit out of the news cycle, like I mentioned immigration, I might think, okay, is there an anniversary of some big issue coming up? Is there something that is really prominent in the news cycle that I can then connect to my current, the issue that I want to talk about? And there's various strategies for this, but you do need to be kind of thoughtful about how are you going to hook your reader. And then another thing that is often included, not a requirement, is the to be sure. So after the 3 examples, you might, Dorothea mentioned you're not going to take time trying to rebut every single potential rebuttal, but you might want to pick one. And the way you do it is you kind of start it, but you flip it on its head and show that it's actually in some ways proving your point even more. So I don't have an example on the top of my head, but like some may say that X and X issue would lead you to believe that abortion is horrible, but in fact those same people are the ones that are doing this other thing that is really terrible to women's health. So in fact, my point, and recap your point, so that can be helpful and is often included as part of the formula.
Thank you so much for saying that much better than I did, Juliana. That's a perfect way of explaining how to address those counterpoints. And what I wanted to make sure that people understand, because doctors in my experience tend to be, and healthcare professionals at large tend to try to be very fair. And it shouldn't be like a fair and balanced analysis of both sides of the argument. It should be the opinion that you hold, even if you are going to point out, this counterpoint it isn't actually what it seems to be, kind of thing. You just don't want to sort of say, on the other hand, there's all of these other concerns that have been raised. But you said it beautifully, and thank you for doing that. And so now we've like sort of swirled this around for everybody. You're thinking about your hook, you're thinking about your lead, you're thinking about what examples you have that are personal to you and that matter to you. And it's almost time to get started.
So before we allow time for practice, we're going to continue talking about why it's important to write an op-ed. And then we'll also get into an example, because by highlighting an example, you'll have a better idea of what to do or perhaps what not to do. And so for that, Eileen, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think also as an extension of what we've heard before, and I think also the things that we already know from talking with our friends, talking with patients, talking with our parents, talking with anybody else, that personal stories matter. We think that we're people who are persuaded by data, and sometimes that is going to be the case, but most often what people remember is the story. So trying to find a story that succinctly summarizes what the issue is, that could really be the grab. You heard about the importance of the lead and being succinct and figuring out a way to make it timely. To remember that we have so many of these. These are the stories that we tell our partners about, that we talk to our work partners and our home partners about, that stay with us, that illustrate why this matters to us. So to remember those. And I recognize that, and that really, and why that's going to be so important is maybe 3 reasons. The first one is because in the digital media era, one has 3 seconds to capture someone else's attention digitally. So I say that because the world is trying to capture your attention. Right now, your phone is trying to capture your attention. Possibly, if you are like me and your texts also go through to your iMessage on your laptop, that's also trying to capture attention. Plus any moment, so is social media, also so might be your dog, so might be your kid, anybody. So we really have this very finite amount of time to be able to capture attention, and we're hardwired to pay attention to stories. I mean, that's why this is huge oral tradition, right, across cultures. So we just try to remember the personal stories do matter. Always tell the story, always try to tie that to the data, like you heard before. Some reference to the expertise, if you will, is different than the data. And then again, the ask. So I will ask that everybody try to remember to write about what you know, what you have lived, and what you've seen or felt. Of course, without being maudlin, that's why it's nice to have someone else help out. But again, people don't know, say, for example, what is our lived experience with when people don't have access to reproductive rights. And you can capture that pretty quickly, and it is a way that grabs people. So yeah, so thank you for calling on me for that.
Thank you. So for prompts, I know, Dorothea, you had highlighted one earlier. I believe it was restoring row. Could you add to that? I know there's a few prompts here on the slide. Perhaps you can cover that a little bit more for us.
Sure. And so this is really just intended to kind of get your brain working on what your issue, what your opinion piece might be about. These are all from the perspective of reproductive health care and, what's going on in our country right now. There's certainly a lot more facets of this that could be explored in an opinion piece. So I don't want anyone to look at this slide and think that this is it. But it should be an opinion that you hold, and you hold that opinion because of like Eileen and Juliana were saying, what you have lived, what you have experienced, what you know to be true. Maybe you're, I don't have the answers to the where are you from question either, but like maybe you're in a state where your reproductive freedom has been severely limited, and you have laws, or you are attempting to pass laws, or you are attempting to get rid of laws that are harming you and your patients. Maybe you have a news cycle in your state, in your town, where there is a very vocal person who is talking about being pro-life, and also you have other issues that you're facing that don't seem very pro-life to you at all, from your perspective as a healthcare provider. It could really be anything. At this point, you've been thinking about it for 43 minutes, so I'm sure you have like a place where the wheel is starting to slow down and stop on the number for you. These are just sort of ideas to start thinking about what your position might be. I wish this was like a little bit so I could see everybody, like show of hands kind of thing, but I don't think you'd be on this call if you didn't have an opinion or something that was under your skin that you didn't already know you wanted to write about.
Excellent points. Thank you for that. Now on to Eileen, who's going to highlight a bad example. And so if you just give me one moment here, I will get us situated to present that. But Eileen, could you start us off? Like, why are we highlighting a bad example of an op-ed?
Yeah, thanks. And I love that you just did the air quotes so people could see that, and so that you can know this bad one was written by me. and that it's not actually what was published. But we wanted to highlight this because we know that most people, when they're doing this, they're afraid that they're not going to do it right. And I believe that you know how to do it, and that by seeing a way to do it that could be done better, it will reflect to you that you already know how to do this, and you know how to review your own work to get to something that is not only well written, but that reflects the best interest of the patients, that reflects the best interest of, that reflects the best evidence, that also reflects well on you and on the profession, and looks its best. So with that, what I wanted to do is highlight a very, very changed version of something that was published in our local paper after I had done some work related to getting a bill introduced into our state legislature, and then it passed the Finance Committee, the Senate, and the House, and was sitting on the governor's desk. We're really waiting to be signed about another issue that I'm passionate about. It happens to not be the one that I wrote about reproductive rights that I added to the chat. But I put this up because I think what could be better. And this was a bill that was trying to get access to medications for opioid use disorder in our correctional system. And I would like to ask you if you can spend a moment with this and then provide some feedback either via the chat, or if we have the ability for people to raise their hand so we can ask them to share what would be some suggestions as a friend that you would give me to say, I wonder if you want to rethink this part. And I'm not going to be offended because this is not what was published. And I do understand that when you're reading this, you might be horrified by some of the language that's in here. And I apologize in advance for that. Yeah, okay. So the first person we see, there's no headline or hook in the title. Yeah. And also I have another problem with the title too, right? We see that the first sentence should be the second sentence. Yeah. And I'm looking for, and I'm going to be scrolling to see if I can see if there's any hands that are raised. And if not, that's okay. I continue to welcome people to add their thoughts into the chat.
And just quickly, if you weren't paying attention or may have gotten distracted and are wondering what's going on, here's an example on the screen, and we'd love for you to identify what could be better about this. Again, as we covered earlier, when it comes to writing an op-ed, it's important to allow someone else to look it over. Here's this opportunity before you. Sorry, go ahead, Eileen.
That was beautifully done. Thank you. And seeing in the chat that another person had also indicated, which really the word addicts, which is pejorative, right? We would say people with an addiction, people with a substance use disorder is usually how the language that we would use. What's very interesting is that this highlights when we see the real one is that in the case where I am, it's the paper that chooses the title. And I had actually reached it. This was the real title. I asked them to change it and they didn't because it had already gone to press. So one just needs to know about that, that can happen, that I never would have used that language, and was pretty horrified to see that in print. We also see that that someone had astutely pointed out that there's a bit of legal name dropping, and that and it's maybe a little bit more inflammatory than it needs to be, and some abbreviations that maybe not everybody will know what they are. And then let's see, looking at some sources to add some evidence, absolutely. I think that always is great. That was a recommendation as well. And then also someone highlighting, like, who is the person reading this? This was in the Santa Fe, New Mexican. Santa Fe is the capital of the state where I live. And like, will they know what HCV means? Which is actually auto-corrected here to HVC instead of Hep C virus, because any of us can make mistakes here. And then the little inflammatory about there's some inaction from the governor, and lots of there's not really a whole lot of maybe connecting this to people, and maybe a little bit judgy. And not only is it judgy, maybe inflammatory, most people they like to be inspired to be a better version of themselves rather than being sort of shamed or moralized too. So I think that there was a lot of great feedback. And my point of saying this is all of you picked up on all of the real challenges here. So thank you for that. And so a real letter did run. And in the context of, I think I may have told you, so I was involved in speaking with a state senator about this issue, him saying, yes, I'll introduce a bill. then providing testimony to the finance committee. Also, now I don't remember if it was the state or the House, one of them, and then waiting to see if it sailed through the committees and sailed through the state and the House, and then was waiting to see if the governor would sign this into law. So knowing that in this case, this is the newspaper where the state legislature and where the governor, I know where their office is, they read the paper every day, then I decided to write a letter to the editor to say, like, you know, maybe they'll read it and it'll like jumpstart to get this on the governor's desk. It ends up 2 days later that this was signed into law. I don't know if this was related to it. I like to think maybe it was a little bit toward it. But what you'll see is that when you look at this, is they changed the title where they used the word addict. I would like not to have seen that, but you can see that the opening sentence is that it, you know, a little bit more balanced, without being balanced, so that it is medically and also morally appropriate to give people treatment for medical conditions such as their substance use disorder, but really kind of summarized the issue, described a little bit of what the bill is. I didn't have enough room to talk about patients. Otherwise, I had a different op-ed where I had done so. And then just a line about how this is the right thing to do, that there's medical expertise, and then why there are these other experts, including the Bureau of Prisons, does support providing these medications, and then describe what is my own credential, which is that I'm a physician who has worked in all this length of time, and that I'm relieved that this is passed. So they did do some editing of it. Of course, I could have done differently, but I think that you can probably see that this, although not perfect, it's good enough. It doesn't reflect poorly on me. It doesn't reflect poorly on the issue. Possibly contributed to the governor signing it. Maybe not, but that certainly a better version than what the first version, where all of you had astutely pointed out that there were some pretty significant limitations. So I just say that to you to say that I think that underscores the fact that you could identify all of those limitations of that other fake letter. It means to me that you're more than ready to do this and to do it really, really well. Maybe I'll stop there to see if either Juliana or Dorothea or if you have any other reflections on that exercise.
I'm just looking for my hand clapping emoji thing.
Oh, thanks.
I think that was a really beautiful demonstration of what our new op-ed writers already have within them.
Yeah, I think they're ready.
All right. Well, on to the next thing, which, as we promised, opportunity to practice. So we have given you the foundation of, what makes a good op-ed, components of an op-ed, along with an example of what not to do. And now is an opportunity to practice that. So you will be given 10 minutes, and afterwards we'll come together, and if you're willing and able to share your example, we'll do that. But again, let's begin drafting an op-ed tonight based on the information that we've learned. So you will have 10 minutes starting now. Thank you. All right. How did that go? Any thoughts, reflections?
I think you making us do it was kind of good, because I always want to and never get around to it. So it's like writing that first paragraph or two, then you can wordsmith it, and then it kind of just keeps on going.
Absolutely. Who else? What thoughts do we have? Any reflections?
Hi, can I say something?
Yes.
Thank you. This is so fascinating. I'm enjoying this so much. But I actually stepped away. I was chatting with somebody about a review. But I like working with people who have diabetes, and I help run a transition clinic where adolescents go from the hospital for children and then into the adult system. So sometimes you come across pregnancies in this teenage group and type 1 diabetes. And I find that that's something very, very hard to deal with. So it's not just the the teenage pregnancy, but it's this diabetes piece that is just like horrendous. And I just thought about writing about that and trying to see. I think it's two big issues, but I felt like this was an important story. And I remember when my son was in high school, so one of these little girls that was with him, she was 12, when she became pregnant, and we went to a Wendy's or something one day, which was across the school, and we saw this girl, and my son pointed her out to me, and he said, "Oh, this is the girl that had a baby," and you could immediately tell, what had happened to her body. You could immediately tell compared to the other girls, right? The 13-year-old or 14-year-old, and you could tell that girl what she must have gone through, and but yes, and this thing with diabetes, of course, is such a challenge. I mean, it's for adolescents and for someone with, so I thought that's something I felt very emotional about.
Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Others? Anyone else care to share? How did the practice writing go?
I really like the prompts about what's getting under your skin as kind of a way to really identify the issue you want to write about. So thanks for that. That was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And so that's one of the things that we wanted to be able to offer tonight, was not only giving you the information and the ways in which you can practice and write an op-ed, but giving you the practice to put it into practice, to do it. We've identified, again, what was composed of a bad op-ed, and many of you had participated in that, which is excellent. And then giving you the tools and the time being the main thing, to practice it. So before we move on, were there any last final comments, reflections from anyone? Anyone cares to share?
Keisha, I wanted to, oh, you're going to move on to questions next?
But go ahead, go for it.
I wanted to address that question about how do you get connected with an editor in a publication, but we can do that when you're ready.
Let's do it.
One of the things I can say, for those of you who are part of Doctors for America or AMWA or any other organizations really coming from ACOG, I can tell you that our communications team, and many of you may also be members of ACOG or another medical association, even the AMA. Those organizations and associations have long-standing existing relationships with a lot of different publications, and some national, some local. And they are typically looking for folks to write op-eds because they kind of have a running list in their minds of like what those publications are looking for, and you can talk to them. So if you have if you have the email address of your professional association, you can send them an email and say, hey, I have an op-ed on gun violence that I'd like to try to get placed somewhere. Can anyone help me? And those people can be great resources to kind of plug you into where they know that their sources are looking for those voices. So that's one suggestion that I have. And maybe Juliana and Eileen have others.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier the op-ed projects list of publications that you can search through. You may already be familiar with what are your main local publications. I liked earlier on one of the slides, it was saying or actually I think someone put in the chat, what are the publications that you read on a regular basis? And then, most of these places will have a website where you can look and see what are the criteria for op-ed submission and who do you send it to. And then we didn't go into it in depth, but the pitch email is kind of its own thing. But basically, you're just saying like, why is this timely? Why is it important? And then you put the text of your op-ed at the bottom. No attachments, and send it off. So that is just like a very brief review of the pitch email, and there are some more details about that in the resource guide we'll provide you.
Yes. Oh,
If
go
I
ahead.
may- if I may build upon that, depending on the publication, they may not, you may not have to send a pitch email the way that you have to do in any context anywhere. So say, for example, I've had my op-eds, I told you about the one in the New York Times, but that's really uncommon. But actually even that wasn't an op-ed, forgive me, that was a letter. But I've had them published in the, throughout New Mexico. So in like the Gallup Independent, the Farmington Daily Times, the Santa Fe New Mexican, the Albuquerque Journal, and also the Telluride Daily Planet. And in none of those did they actually want to pitch. They just had a direct portal on their website. What was helpful was that they asked for your address. So I'm clear that I'm a local when those are the cases. I'm also clear when I'm not a local, and that's okay as well. I also I do subscribe to local newspapers, and I don't agree with the politics of my local paper that appear often on the editorial page. But that's also the reason that I'm very tempted often to stop my subscription. But one of the big reasons is I want to know what people are saying about the issues that I care about, and I want to be able to comment on them. And I think it was a very natural, for me, it's a good use of my $20 a month that that when I submit a letter or an op-ed to them, that it's a natural thing if they check to see if I'm a subscriber. And so I want them to know that I am. And I think that helps grease the wheels. I'm not saying that everybody needs to be a subscriber, but I think if you are already a subscriber, then it might make it a little bit easier. If you're not, you may wish to consider if that is worth your money. If you have in my case, the $20 a month to spare for our two local papers, that because it just seemed like it's easier for me to be able to reply. And which is slightly, I recognize, further afield than what people had, the question that you had asked. But I guess the take home very specifically was it could be the pitch email, or sometimes depending on the paper, and you can just Google the name of the paper and then say op-eds, and then just hit, and then it will tell you if it's just a portal that you cut and paste your document into. And
Perfect.
also, if one feels like, oh, an op-ed seems really intimidating, even though you are the expert, and even though you all gave me expert feedback on my fake op-ed, also just start with a letter. Letters are easy. They're like 175 words. Oftentimes you can start by just dictating them into your phone. You can take the 10 minutes that you spent here, and you will have 80% of the work done.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so rapid fire, we have a couple questions we have not gotten to, and I want to be sure that we end close to being on time. But one of the questions that we received was, any tips on reaching out to the editor to identify and find out if the topic interests the readers?
I think that just submitting your op-ed is going to give you the answer to that question. That's going to be the deciding factor, and one of the deciding factors in the editor's mind. But you can get a gestalt of what people are talking about and what they care about by reading that publication. By reading the other op-eds and kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of that publication, and you will get a sense for what they're accepting.
Awesome. Thank you. And another question is it better to have the op-ed already written and then ask the editors if they want it, or ask the editor first, then write the op-ed? Thoughts?
So maybe I'll just jump in and say that having never reached out to the editor, I think that, wow, you people are really, really thoughtful to have done that. I think that it depends on how one feels about if it doesn't get run. So that if one feels like it would feel really dispiriting, then to have done the work and not have it be published, then and if it doesn't seem too intimidating, I think just either emailing them on their website, their emails will be there, and usually they're pretty excited to. Every journalist I've ever talked with has been really happy to hear from somebody who sent a polite email rather than a lot of the vitriol that they end up getting. So I think an email is helpful. It also, people can do the cold call depending on the paper. If one feels like, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm really passionate no matter what, I'm going to submit it. If it doesn't get accepted the first time, it just means a different home. And then just submit it someplace else. Maybe look to see if you need to change a few words for the audience. But most of us have had something. I certainly have had things that haven't been accepted, but then I've tried someplace else and they've run there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
So-
I would underscore that and say that in my experience, no editor is going to sort of give you like a preview of whether your article or letter is going to be published. But if you do contact one of those, like a communications person in one of your associations, they will be able to tell you, like, I've reached out to every one of my contacts every week for the past 16 weeks, and I still have this pile of op-eds that I'm trying to get placed. Like they can, and have often told me, you know, like put it in the pile. Oh, another op-ed on this. No one's publishing that right now. So you can get a sense from like talking to people in the industry who do talk to, you know, journalists and reporters and who know what the backlog is, but the editor themselves is not going to sort of like pre-screen and say like, if you write it, I will publish it. That's not going to happen.
That's very true. Well, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you to our lovely speakers. Thank you to all of you who joined and listened in and participated. Greatly appreciate you all. As a just brief reminder, we will have the slides and a resource sheet sent out following our presentation. Greatly appreciate all of you, your time, and looking forward to a plethora of op-eds being written here, hopefully published in the next week or so, tops, yes. But no, truly, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate you. You all have a lovely evening, day. Take care, stay healthy and hydrated, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.